Hey everyone, and welcome to this short demo about transformWithState in Batch. So if you have read my previous blog post, you certainly know already that you can use the transformWithState as a new arbitrary stateful processing function in streaming applications. So I prepared a few examples already on the GitHub that you can see, for example, here where I have some kind of in-memory streaming data source that I'm going to transform with this function. So I'm defining all the stream related things like the output mode, time mode for the expiration time, initial state, and of course I'm using this streaming API under the hood. But the good thing is that you can use the same abstraction, of course, except the read and write APIs that must be in batch for your batch pipeline. So here I have a simple example with this stateful processing with initial state function that I'm going to apply on top of this static data set. And the workflow is pretty similar to what you saw before, because I have my initial state as a data frame grouped by key. I have some input data that is finite in this case, and of course the transformWithState function that ignores all these expiration parameters, but they are still there for the API compatibility. And the whole magic happens under the hood. I'm explaining this a bit more in the blog post, which is linked in the description of this video. So what this function does is nothing fancy, just some kind of state that accumulates the numbers from the input and that prints all of them in the end. So you will also see that since we don't have the expiration handling, this method will not be called here. I will run the code and show you what happens. And yes, sample as is, we have some kind of state initialization once by key. You can see that we have three different keys here, three different rows, sorry. Later we have also the input rows that are concatenated with those, and in the end we are printing the result. One thing to notice though is that, as you can see here, we have some initial state for letter B, but we don't have any input records for this letter. And consequently, this handle input rows function is not invoked, and you don't see the B letter in the output data frame. So the reason for that is pretty simple. So handle initial state is only used to initialize the state. It doesn't return anything. So it simply puts some kind of data to the in-memory state store, and later is only the handle input rows that is responsible for generating the output. And since we don't have the B letter in the input numbers, it's normal that we don't see it in the generated result. Okay. And in the blog post, I also mentioned that you can use the transformWithState to implement some kind of stateful incremental processing. It's the case of this code snippet. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm creating a local directory with the state, and I'm simulating three different iterations. And in each iteration, I'm either calling the native transformWithState, so the transformWithState without the state initialization, or I'm calling the transformWithState with the state initialization. And what's the difference? When we have some state initialization, we are reading the data written by the previous batch. So in this batch number 2, we are going to read the number 1. In the batch number 3, we are going to read the batch number 2. And consequently, this will be kind of state that will be moving throughout this next iteration, these next iterations. and consequently we will be able to combine any new input row with the state created in the previous execution. And how does it look like? Unlike in our previous example, we have a simple output in the handle input rows. In our next example, with this kind of incremental processing simulation, the handle input rows returns a tuple composed of string, which is the output, and a case class called state to persist, which is the column that is going to be written in this state directory, and that will be available for the next batch as a state, as the initial state. So let me run the code right now and show you some output. Generally the input doesn't change, so you should see the number, the letters 1 added, yeah, in each batch version. So we have 1 and 3 for the first execution. For the second we have 1 and 3 from the previous one plus the new 1 and 3, and similarly for the batch number 3. And that's all I wanted to share with you about the code for the transform with state in batch. And for more details, I invite you to read the blog post, which is linked in the description of this video. It was Bartosz Konieczny from waitingforcode.com. Thanks for watching.